This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anna Lee Kruger with Care Rights Incorporated. Thank you for listening to the podcast today. I appreciate it. We're on Facebook Live, so if you're on Facebook Live, then thank you for joining in today. Today's topic is mistakes that families make when choosing a care community for their elderly loved one. For those of you who follow me on Facebook and listen to my podcasts and speaking engagements and have probably worked with me in the past, we at Care Right help families across the country develop an aging plan. We find out what's working well with your situation, what's not working well, what are the goals as your loved ones age, what are their financial resources to pay for care if they need it. What information do you have about your aging loved ones? Do you know if they've got their living will, their power of attorney? Do you know what they have for finances? Do you know what they have for insurance? Because when there's a crisis, you will need to know all of that. So that's what we do at Care Right. We help families get everything organized, and we facilitate the family meetings so that we can help make sure that you're all on the same page and making informed decisions. So today's topic is, I purposely chose assisted living and looking for care communities as a topic today, because I would say of the 5 major mistakes that families make when they try to do all this kind of aging planning and care planning on their own, it's because they don't know what they don't know, and unless you're in this industry, that'd be like me trying to do heart surgery on a patient. That's not my scope of practice. And if you're an average son and an average daughter and an average caregiver who's just doing life, and then now you're forced into having to decide what's going to be the best interest for mom or dad, or for me, if you're the caregiver to a spouse who's sick, I see families make a lot of very, very expensive mistakes. So without further ado, this topic today is mistakes families make when moving a loved one into a care community. So we're going to be talking about different levels of care. In the old days, before independent living and assisted living was available, it was basically, if you couldn't manage at home, then the only other option was either move in with your kids, which that's a whole nother podcast topic. But it was either, if you couldn't manage it on your own at your house, then you move in with your kids. And if that's not an option, then you needed to go to a nursing home. But fortunately, through the course of time, we have all sorts of different options, so it doesn't have to be so either home or a nursing home type option. So a lot of you are probably finding yourselves in a predicament right now because of COVID, and probably before COVID, you may have noticed some changes or declines in your loved one. Maybe you're seeing more confusion or forgetfulness. You're seeing them be unsteady when they walk, and they're starting to trip or stumble or fall. Maybe you saw, the weight loss where they're not eating well, they're not drinking enough fluids, and they're getting dehydrated and urinary tract infections. Maybe you noticed when you came over from 5 months ago when you made your last visit to your parents that their clothes are loose. So that's another indication, of course, that they're not eating properly. Maybe when you were there to visit, or when you're Skyping with them because of the pandemic, you talk to them about their medications. What medications are you taking, and what's your system that you have to make sure that you get your medications every day? And who's ordering your medications for you? You'd be surprised how many elderly people, when they don't have family members or, like me, a professional advocate to oversee their care, they're not getting all of their medications that the doctor prescribed, because some of them you have to see a doctor every 30 days to get a new prescription. And if your loved one's not doing that, then they're going without medication that they're supposed to be taking. So there's a whole thing that we'll be talking about on all of these podcasts about the caregiver crisis and kind of all things aging that you as family members need to know so that you can help make informed decisions and be properly supported along the way. With COVID, there's families that, like I said, have noticed that their loved one is starting to decline, either weight loss, they're not taking their medications properly, they're more forgetful or confused, or maybe they're having anxiety and depression issues, or their dementia has progressed to the point where they aren't safe at home because of either falling or they're wandering out of the home, or they're still driving and then they get lost when they drive. And in some states, like where I am in Florida, we have what's called a silver alert. So pretty much every day that you drive on the interstate, you'll see signs, the signs on the interstate that says, watch out for this Toyota Corolla, it's a silver alert. It's similar to an amber alert, except for with elderly people that are lost when they're driving. So you're in the predicament of, you notice that changes are happening with your loved one or your loved ones, but now that we're in this pandemic and all these health facilities and care communities are on lockdown, unless you absolutely have to put your loved one in a facility right now, knowing that you're basically dropping them off at the curb, and then God knows when you're going to be able to see them again. Healthcare will be the last segment of the world to open up because of COVID. So, a lot of families that I work with, they're trying to just kind of limp along while we sit and wait to see when are these facilities going to open up. They are employing home care companies to provide live-in care or around-the-clock care for their loved one so that at least you can still check on your loved one and see your loved one versus putting them in a facility and then not being able to see them at all. So what do you do if you're in that boat or in that predicament? You notice changes with your loved one, and now we're in the middle of a pandemic. What are you supposed to do? So a couple of options are bringing in home care. Some adult daycare centers across the country are starting to open up as well. So that would be an option for daytime respite for your loved one to have some socialization and engagement and a break for you if you're the caregiver right now. So there are a few different options. But what I want you to do is be thinking about, this is food for thought for when you can get in and actually tour these facilities. I want to give you some ideas of, how do I even choose what type of care center my loved one needs or care community my loved one needs. A lot of people have heard of these placement companies where that's all they do is they just do placement. That means that they don't charge you or your loved one any money, but it's simply a transaction. You say, okay, placement company, mom needs assisted living. So then they give you a list of all the facilities that they get a kickback from or that they have a contract with. And then that's the end of it. It's just a transaction. There's no planning. There's no conversation about, okay, this is great for now while mom has money, but what happens if mom runs out of money? Can she stay here or what do we do then? There's none of that. It's simply placement. And then you're a transaction and they move on to the next person. So some people like that idea because there's no cost to you as a family, but there is a cost to you down the road when your loved one runs out of money, or if that placement, that facility that they placed your loved one in isn't providing proper care or you're not satisfied, then you still have to go through the route of redoing what they didn't do right the first time. So there are some the pro to that is that you don't have to pay any money, which appeals to a certain segment of people. But the cons are that it's transaction based. There's no relationship. When your money runs out, you have to move out of those care communities, and they're not going to be there to help you. These placement companies, they're not going to be able to help you because they can't contract with Medicaid. So if you run out of money and you find yourself on Medicaid, they can't help you. So then you end up still having to go through a company like me, and then it costs you more money in the long run because you didn't do it right the first time because you didn't know what you didn't know. So I'm a believer in let's do it right the first time instead of try to piecemeal plans and use different companies to try to accomplish the same thing that one company can do for you and your whole family. They are commission-based, so most of them get the first month's rent of that particular facility. So they may get $2,000 a month or $2,000, or they may get a $4,000 commission. It depends on what level of care and which facility and what that contract looks like or what that contract says. So they make a few $1,000s off of you. And if you're comfortable with that, then great. If not, then you know that I'm here for you as a resource as well. You only get exposed to the facilities that they contract with. So even if, facility B down the street is the better fit for you and your loved one, if they don't have a contract with that particular facility, you're not going to know about it. So I think that's pretty important to know. So my job is to just help you know that there's resources out there and the pros and cons of what some of these options might be, so then you can make an informed decision. The other thing is, like I mentioned, that when your loved one runs out of money, and if they put your loved one in a facility that doesn't accept Medicaid because you don't know to ask about that, then the facility will say, you know what, when you can't pay your rent, you've got to move out. And then what do? With the landscape of healthcare and more people running out of money and Medicaid being stretched to is completely stretched, that's when we see families having to drive 3 or 4 hours one way just to go see their loved one because that's the only facility that had an open bed for a Medicaid patient. So if your family is in that predicament of what do we do, this is the money that we have, how can we make that stretch, you have to plan ahead for that. You've got to develop a strategy. The other thing is when you inquire online at some of these placement companies, you will forever be bombarded with emails and phone calls. So just know that if you go online and fill out their contact form, it's almost impossible to get off their list because they also sell your list. They sell your contact information, so you will always get bombarded with all things placement related. So if you're comfortable with that, then this might be a good option for you. The other cons are that they're not going to be there to hold your hand every step of the way. Like I said, it's simply a transaction. So when Ethel moves into that assisted living, these placement companies are long gone. They've already moved on to the next family. So the benefits of working with companies like CareRight, like mine, is we take you by the hand, we facilitate your family meeting, and we figure out what are going to be the right solutions for you and your loved one based on what they can afford and what resources are available for the family. If you're the daughter and you have it in your heart of hearts that you want to help take care of your mom for 6 months and then figure out what to do, then that's what we plan for. And we put a strategy in place so that everyone can be successful. When we at CareRight help families with finding suitable communities to move into, it's an entire process. These are not quick conversations to have with your family. It's not like we're making out or writing out a grocery list where it's emotionless and quick. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot to have to consider. For example, what if you are the daughter and your siblings all live in different states and mom and dad need care, but what if dad needs one level of care and mom needs a different level of care? What if mom needs memory care unit and dad needs assisted living? Where are they going to go so that they're not separated? So that's what we help you explore is what are your options, what are your goals, and what are your resources so that we can compile a plan that works for you. So if you're going to try to do some of this on your own, good luck. It's almost a full-time job because there's a lot of information that you have to shift through. We do all of that for our clients. We do a community matrix, and so we do all the research on these facilities. We look at their state surveys for the last 3 years, or the last 3 state surveys, so that we can get a sense of what are their problem areas, what do they do well, and what don't they do well, what's their staffing model. So for example, in memory care, we'll just use my mom as a case study right now. My mom is in a memory care unit down here in Southwest Florida. And, what's important to know when you are moving a loved one into a care community like a memory care unit is, do they have nurses on staff? Do they have nurses on first and second shift, or what is the staffing model? Do they have call lights in the room, or are they a call necklace, a pendant that you have to push if you need help? So how do you reach out for help if you need it? Are there 24-hour nursing staff? What is the staffing ratio during first shift, second shift, and third shift? Because obviously as on third shift, it's going to be less because they're hopeful that the residents are sleeping. What does the training look like? Of course, they're all going to say that because they do have the same training requirements, because that's a state rule, but what does it actually look like? So if your loved one is in a memory care unit like my mom is, what is your specific training that you've had? And how do you hold staff accountable so that if they aren't taking good care of your loved one, what is your course of action? Who's your contact person? If you have any concerns or praises, like I tell the staff, I'm like, wow, good job. Mom always looks good. She smells good. They put perfume on her. But if they don't put her compression hose on, or if she ends up with a urinary tract infection, then you need to know who you're supposed to go to and develop a relationship with them so that they can start doing things right, doing things properly. Who passes the medications? Is it a nurse that passes the medications, or is it a med tech? Most of these assisted living centers, to keep their costs low for labor, instead of having a nurse like in the good old days, the nurses passed meds like they do in a long-term care center. In assisted living, they use med techs. They're certainly not nurses. They've had a few hours of training on how to pass pills. And the nurse is supposed to supervise or oversee them and checking to make sure that medications were done properly. They may do that once a week, once a shift. Every facility is different, so you have to find that information out. Who is overseeing the medication management? For example, with my mom, there's been a few times of medications or creams weren't ordered when they got out. They finished the tube of cream and the med tech didn't notify the nurse to notify the pharmacy. So what are your systems for medication management? That should be one of your questions. What is your system for medication management? And who do I go to if there's concerns? Just in case you're just jumping in on this podcast, my name is Anna-Lee Kruger with Care Right Incorporated. Today we're talking about mistakes that most families make because they don't know what they don't know about choosing care communities for your loved one. So find out the staffing model. What is the ratio on each shift? Do they have activities? What kind of activities do they have? Ask for the activity calendar. Go tour during activity time. How engaged are the residents? Do the residents look like they're having fun? Do the staff look like they're having fun? Do the staff smile? Do the staff greet you and welcome you and say, welcome to wherever it is, Hallmark Care Center, or whatever it is, care community that you're touring? How welcoming do you feel, or how welcomed do you feel? Another question to ask is, what would make my loved one have to leave here? So if you're looking at assisted living, for example, so where my mom is, I know that if she cannot pivot transfer, so if she can't bear weight, she can't stay there. She would have to go to a nursing home. If my mom ends up with a stage 3 skin ulcer, she can't stay there. They're not equipped for that. They're not licensed for that. So find out what they're licensed for and how sick can my loved one be and still stay here. So for example, some facilities are only licensed for as long as you can use a walker or walk independently, or even use a wheelchair, they can stay there. But some of these facilities are licensed that they can't use a Hoyer lift. They can't use a sit to stand or an easy stand. They cannot use any equipment. So if you can't get out of your chair or get out of your bed without using equipment, you can't stay there. And then what do? You know, so that's why this isn't just an easy process. You have to have either all of this information and do it yourself, or you need to retain someone to help you with this, because it's very overwhelming and there's a lot that you have to consider that most people just don't. Honestly, most people are like, you know what? Hallmark is down the street from me. That's perfect because it's close by. Well, that's great, but what if they don't accept Medicaid and your loved one has $60,000 left? So that means they might have 6 months of pay that they can pay, and then they have to move out. Or what if they had a really crappy state survey where it's resident rights and resident dignity issues and medication errors, and most states it's a less than 5% medication error that's deemed acceptable by the state. What if they have a 9% medication error rate? That's a big deal. So these are things that you need to know to make an informed decision. So while that's great that Hallmark is down the street, if they provide crappy care, it's a good thing that they're down the street from you, because you will have to be there all of the time. So don't always go just by convenience. There's much more that needs to go into these decision makings if you and your loved one want to have good outcomes. Let's see. I have some notes here. Financial. Again, we've already talked about this. What happens when my loved one runs out of money? Can they stay here? Do you have an association or a relationship with another care community that they just kind of transition over to? Or what's that picture look like when mom runs out of money and she can't stay here? What levels of care do you offer, and what are the price ranges? So and they all do things differently. That's why it's complicated. So some facilities, it's $4,000, hypothetically, $4,000 a month room and board. But then if your mom needs this bucket of care and then she needs more care and more care, then they have different what's called levels of care that they charge for. It might be $850 a month for medication management. And then if she needs baths and supervision and all this other stuff, then it's another $500 a month. So find out what are the levels of care, and what are those price points, or what are those ranges for each level of care, so you can determine, okay, if it's going to cost $9,000 a month for mom to be in assisted living, how long is her money going to last? Can she afford to stay there? Because the last thing you want, it's not ideal that when your loved one runs out of money, then you have to figure out, okay, what nursing home are they going to go to? And like I said at the beginning of the podcast, nursing homes back in, when I first started doing this 25 years ago, all facilities, all nursing centers, what we call skilled nursing centers now, it used to call them nursing homes, but all skilled nursing centers, or most of them, contracted with Medicaid and Medicare, right? So it didn't matter what your payer source was, as long as it was either Medicare, private pay, Medicaid, or long-term care insurance, they didn't really care. Well, guess what? They don't get reimbursed the full amount on a Medicaid patient. So if your loved one is on Medicaid and they need a lot of care, a lot of supervision, they have 16 different medications that they're on, these facilities don't get reimbursed for the level of care and level of service and time and resources that's required to take care of them. So what's happened in the last 15 years or so is these long-term care centers have decertified those beds with Medicaid. So if it's a 100-bed nursing home or skilled nursing center, they may only have 5 beds that are earmarked for Medicaid. So I can tell you most of these facilities get 15, 20 phone calls per week at least from families who are in that predicament of mom ran out of money, where is she supposed to go? That's why some of these families are driving 5, 6, 7, 8 hours one way just to go see their loved one, because that's where there was an open bed. So if you picked up my drift, this requires proper planning, and it's not just a matter of convenience. It's a matter of we have to have an actual strategy if we're going to do this right, and if we're going to do right by our parents. So the financial piece is huge. Most families or most consumers don't realize that to move into these communities, a lot of them require 2 to 3 years or more of private pay. You have to fill out a financial application for many of them. And if you can't pay 2 or 3 years of private pay, you can't get in, you don't qualify. So you have to financially qualify, you have to physically qualify, and you have to cognitively qualify. So what does that mean? That means that oftentimes, seniors, your mom and dad, or if you're the senior listening to this, they are so hell-bent on wanting to stay home and age in place at home and not leave their house until they die. Well, that's great, and that's a great goal, but that's also very expensive. I've got clients paying for one person $8,500 a month for them to stay at home and live in caregivers. So if you're married and you both need care, that could be $16,000, $20,000 a month, and that's just caregivers. That's just someone to be there to help you with your bathing, your dressing, your transportation. Now, if you need professional services on top of that, like a skin nurse or a wound nurse or anything like that, and you end up having to pay private pay for that, it's going to be very, very expensive, which is fine if you can afford that and you planned for that. But most people don't realize that that's all out of pocket. Most people think Medicare is going to pay for all of this, and it just simply does not. So that's what I mean. There's a lot of ignorance with families because you don't know what you don't know, and that's why they're making very, very expensive mistakes. So most people end up waiting at home too long to move. And so instead of moving into what they could have moved into, like an assisted living center, because they stayed at home too long and now they are more vulnerable and decrepit and needing more and more care, they don't even qualify for assisted living level of care anymore. Now they only qualify for nursing home level of care. And that's a very different look and a very different feel than it is in an assisted living center. Assisted livings and independent livings are like an apartment. A nursing home or skilled nursing, unless you have your own private room, you're going to have a roommate, and there's enough room in those facilities for a hospital bed, a nightstand, and a chair, and that's about it. So just know that there's different levels of care and there's pros and cons to both, but you need to move in at the right time, because if you wait too long at home, you're going to bypass all of these really valuable options that assisted livings can offer, like activities, socialization, 3 meals a day, medication management, other people around them, transportation to doctor's appointments and activities, outside activities. You know, I came from the Milwaukee market. A lot of those care communities, assisted livings and so forth, they take them to the games, they take them to the museum, they take them to the parks, they take them out at Christmas time so they can look at the Christmas lights. So these are all important things. Like, what do you have to offer? What are your amenities? There's care communities that have a huge gym and a swimming pool, and some of them have tennis courts. And so, I mean, it's really important to find out what do they offer, because the more active that you or your loved one can be, the better quality of life they're going to have, because they're going to stay healthier longer. When families decide, or when seniors say that they're going to stay at home, I can tell you it's not as romantic of an idea as what people think. They think that staying at home is going to be the best thing ever. But when you're relying on, 15, maybe 8 or 15 different home care aides to come in to fill all the shifts, and if the caregiver calls in sick or is a no-show, who's going to take care of you for that 8 or 12-hour shift? And if your family doesn't live near you, who's going to do that? You are. You're going to end up trying to take care of yourself, and you might fall. So there's some downside to that. To the cost can be really expensive for some people to be able to stay at home. But just as important, if not more important as the cost, is that as you get older and you're more frail and you lose your mobility and you're no longer driving, and it's harder for you to get out of your chair and get into your wheelchair and get into the bathroom, people tend to just sit in their recliner all day and they watch TV, and that's all they have for activity and stimulation. They're not eating properly. If you walk with a walker or use a wheelchair, you're not going to be cooking meals. You're going to be eating potato chips and Twinkies because that's what's easy to open. You're going to be eating soup, which is high in sodium, so your feet are going to swell. I mean, that's what happens when people chose to stay at home and they don't have enough supports in place. They don't thrive. They end up anxiety. They end up with depression because we're social people. We need to be around other people. That's one of the problems with COVID right now, with all these seniors that are in lockdown. We're seeing more and more depression, anxiety, more and more seniors that are getting more confused and forgetful because they have no socialization. They can't see their family. They're not getting activities. They're not going out to church. They're not doing anything. So their quality of life has suffered. And that's sometimes what happens when your loved one stays at home and they're not getting any of the things that they need to have a quality of life. We also see at home, and keep in mind, I come at this from seeing all sorts of disasters that families find themselves in. You know, by the time families sometimes come to me, their loved one is so medically complex that we have to figure out what level of care do they now qualify for that they can afford, and where is that going to take place? Is it going to take place in the town that they live in? What if there's no kids in that town and they need to relocate to be closer to one of their kids so that their kids can oversee their care? You know, by the time families come to me, their relationships with each other, with a family, are so strained. No one's on the same team. No one's working together. Everyone's just kind of at each other's throat for a lot of different reasons. And so, you know, the goal is really let's talk about these things now versus at the 11th hour when you're in the midst of a crisis and you no longer get along with your family and your loved one has spent tons of money that maybe they wouldn't have had to if they would have known what their better options would have been from the get-go, versus going through lots and lots of money thinking that they know what they're doing. We already talked about activities. You know, get a copy of the activity calendar. What do they do for outings? Do they have transportation? Are there birds? Are there fish? Are there pets? Is there a facility animal? You know, and what's the level of involvement that you can have with that? You know, if we're looking at assisted living, a lot of these assisted livings are pet friendly. So if you have a cat or dog, and as long as you can take care of your animal, as long as you can take care of your pet, most of these assisted livings are pet friendly. It's when you get to a nursing home or skilled nursing level of care, that's when you can't have your own pet anymore. So depending on what level of care you're touring, these are all questions you're going to want to ask. Is there any kind of pet therapy? Like, I'm a huge animal lover, so it would be really important for me that they have a therapy dog that comes around or a therapy cat that comes around. I'm not going to be excited about a fish, you know, a cage of birds. I'm not going to be excited by that, but someone else might be. So it's important to find these things out. If you're a piano player, do they have a piano? I mean, I help families to do these tours, and I had a family member, we usually do a tour of 5 to 8 different communities just so that you can get a flavor of what each one offers. And do you want a high rise or do you want a smaller community that might have 50 people or 50 units in it? So I kind of become like a realtor, and you're like, okay, what's on the list of must-haves and what would be nice to have? But one of the families I was touring, and she had a lot of money, so she had options she had options that other people wouldn't have had. And so the daughter wanted to tour these really highfalutin places that were brand new and multi-million-dollar artwork, and I mean, it was just crazy over the top. But she wanted to go there because that's the lifestyle that she was accustomed to, not that mom was accustomed to. That's the other thing. Are you looking for you or are you looking for your mom? So the daughter wanted to check out these really high expensive places. And so we did, because that's what I do. I listen to my families. And so I said, let's tour 5 different communities, and then you can get a sense of what are the pros and what are the cons of each. So the first tour was this really fancy dancy one at 9 o'clock in the morning. And she's like, oh, I love this. Cause she got so distracted by all the beautiful artwork and the pictures and the carpet and the plush furniture. And I was like, yeah, that's great that they spent their money on that, but let's see how the staff interact. So, because she was already wowed at the lobby, she's like, oh, this is the place. And I'm like, yeah, you just wait. And so the receptionist wasn't smiling. She was like on the phone and she didn't look happy. And then when we stepped up to her reception desk, she's like, what can I do for you? Just like that, just no warmth or anything. Like we were a bother to her. So I'm just like, pay attention to this kind of stuff. And so the daughter's like, huh. And she's like, oh, that's no big deal. So, because she's a receptionist, what difference does that make? And I'm like, it makes a difference. And so as we're doing the tour, there's like very few staff in sight. Like, where are they? And we're doing the tour. We're there because at each level of care that you tour, you should budget about an hour. Because you want to get a good sense of, could I really live here? Or would my loved one really be able to live here? So you don't want to just rush through this. This isn't grocery shopping. This is looking for a place for your loved one to move to. So we're there for a good hour, and call lights are going off. There's no one answering any call lights. The residents didn't look well cared for. We toured in the afternoon after lunch. Or I'm sorry, this was at 9 o'clock in the morning. We toured right after breakfast, and there were residents that still had breakfast food on their shirts during the tour. There were residents that were just plunked in front of the television, and there was no activity, no stimulation. They were supposed to be having an activity at like 9:30. We were still there at 9:30 doing the tour because it started at 9. No activities were happening. But you know what? This was a beautiful, beautiful facility. So my point in all of that is, don't get distracted by how beautiful a facility looks, because that's only the surface. You're not having your loved one, or you're not going there for the beauty of it. Would it be nice? Sure. But you're going there to get care, interaction, and be in an environment that's friendly and supportive of what your needs are. So 2 tours later to 2 other facilities, we're touring this other, it was pretty run down. It wasn't updated. It still had mauve. So that tells you how old it was. Still had old icky carpet in it, but the staff were so friendly. They're like, oh, welcome. And we're so glad you're here. And let's show you around. I mean, they had energy to them. And the daughter-in-law, or this daughter, was like so excited because she'd already been through this like fancy place where nobody was around, and the people that were around were really grumpy. And so I said, just know that this place is outdated, but I said, it's really got good energy. The residents here are really happy. There's always different activities going on. And so we're doing the tour, and she's starting to warm up to this place, right? And so what sealed the deal was that they had a bird cage, and they had 2 pianos throughout this whole big building. And she goes, that's exactly what my mother would love, because my mother plays the piano and she loves birds. The fancy dancy place at 9 a.m., they didn't have any of that. So my point is, ask these types of questions. Do they have a piano? Whatever is important to your loved one, or if you're the one that's looking for potential, moving into a care community, do they offer what is important to you? Transportation, outings, what's important to you? So this daughter chose this rundown community. Rooms were small because it's an old building. Rooms were small, but you know what? Her mom was happy as a clam because she played the piano every day. She got to look at the birds in the bird cage, and she got to know all the other residents there, and the staff became her friends. You wouldn't have gotten that at the 9 o'clock in the morning tour because nobody was around, and the people that were around were really unfriendly. So these are just some helpful tips. Meals is another category to look into. Do you have a chef? A lot of these care communities now, the last few years, they're trying to make their care community feel less institutionalized. So now it's more of like a dining experience. You order off of a menu. So ask about these things. What is the dining experience like? Do you have a chef? What happens if mom, or what if you're the one touring for you, what if I don't like what's served? What substitutes can I get? Do you order off the menu? What choices do I have? Can I sit wherever I want to sit? Back in the old days, everybody had an assigned seat. It's different now. So do they honor special diets? What if you're vegan or gluten-free or whatever some of these newer diets are? Do you honor those? So ask about those kind of things. If you're in assisted living and you're touring assisted living, what meals are provided? So like in Florida, they have to provide 3 meals a day in assisted living. But if you're in a different state, all the states have some different guidelines. So if they only provide 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day, do you have a meal plan that they can purchase so that they can get their breakfast, or how does that work? So additional tour tips. Like I already alluded to in my little example of the lady that chose the older care community for her mom instead of the fancy dancy new one. Observe the residents. Do they look happy? Do they look well taken care of? Are the staff engaged with the residents? Are they joking around? Are they talking? Or are they just simply wheeling that person in the wheelchair and they're just like a task? Like, oh, I need to get her here so then I can go back and get Sally over here over to the therapy gym. So really, really pay attention to how are the residents interacted with the staff. If you come during a meal time, how engaged are the staff? Like in a skilled nursing center or a memory care unit where there's going to be more hands-on help for those residents because they need that level of care. How engaged are they? How engaged are the staff with the residents and when they're helping feed them? Are they also on their phone on Facebook while they're putting the spoon in mom's mouth? Or are they trying to encourage mom to eat? Are they having residents just sit there who can't feed themselves? Are they just sitting there for half an hour and then, oh, Ethel doesn't want to eat today, so she's done. Well, nobody even cued her. No one cued her or tried to help her. So these are things you have to pay attention to, especially if you're looking at skilled nursing or nursing home level of care or a memory care unit, because those residents cannot advocate for themselves. So you have to feel confident in your selection of where you're moving your loved one, if it's a memory care type situation or skilled nursing. That's a whole nother podcast with just horror things that I've seen, because it's not good. So pay attention during the tour. Are call lights being answered? Just like in my example, the 9:00 a.m. tour with the daughter in that expensive ritzy place. Call lights were going off the entire hour-long tour. No one answered them. That's a red flag. Do the staff smile and greet you? Do the residents appear happy and well taken care of? Do the ladies have makeup on if they want makeup on? Do they have earrings? Do they have their nails polished? Do the men look shaved? Do they still have food on them from the previous meal? Are their wheelchairs and walkers clean, or is there caked on food and caked on other stuff that you don't want to know about? So how clean are they? Are the residents just gathered in one room with no supervision or little supervision and no activities? Some of these memory care units, they just plunk them right in this group activity room, but there's no activity. The residents are trying to engage with each other, but that's the extent of the activity. So I can't focus enough on activities, because so many of us have our loved one go to a care community because of the activity and socialization. So you really need to be a very involved daughter or a very involved spouse or a very involved son to make sure that your loved one is getting the level of service that you are hoping that they're going to get from that particular care community. So with COVID, it's obviously very difficult. You're probably, if you already have a loved one in a care community, they're using Skype and Zoom and Facebook, video, and, they're trying to keep you involved and keep you engaged and your loved one engaged as well. But it's tricky right now because these facilities are not offering activities. And that's why our residents that are in these care communities are failing, because families not in there to help advocate. So it's kind of right now and anything goes. There's no checks and balances. So you want to be mindful of that. Environment. Obviously, this is the easiest one on this entire list of tips. Does it pass the smell test? If you walk in and you're already gagging, you might as well just turn back around and forget it. But call the state on your way out, because that means there's a problem. So does it pass the smell test? Is parking convenient for you or your loved one if you have mobility issues? So say you're the daughter and you're looking for, your dad to move into a memory care unit, for example, but your mom gets around really, it's difficult for her to get around, or you live up north and it's snowy and icy and windy. So is the parking lot easy for your loved one to navigate in? How easy is it for parking? Do they seem like they have enough close range parking for, if your mom has mobility issues, does it look like she's going to be able to easily visit your dad? Are the rooms and bathrooms clean and spacious? My mom was in a skilled rehab unit, and twice actually, and the floors were just disgusting, utterly disgusting. So pay attention to all of those indications that maybe something's not quite right. So if you have your loved one in a care community and you're seeing that things aren't quite right, you need to bring those up. Do not be afraid to be an advocate. So you need to be having regular conversations with the nursing staff. Does mom have her compression stockings on? Is she being toileted? Does she need anything? Last week I asked the staff, does mom need anything? Because it's been a few weeks since I brought her shampoo and conditioner, and they're like, oh yeah, she's been out of shampoo. And, so you have to stay on top of them, because they're not going to think about it. They're doing a shower here, and then the next thing they need to do is do another shower. So they may think, oh yeah, that's right, I need to call the daughter and have her bring in shampoo, but they're not going to do that. So you have to be on top of those kind of things. Does the building look kept up? So they're supposed to be, obviously, because it's a state regulation that anything that's licensed is going to be regulated by the state. So they all have their rules and regulations of, water temperature and care and dignity and resident rights and, medication errors. Like I said in the beginning of the podcast, anything more than 5% a problem for medication errors. But does the building look kept up? So do they take pride in the exterior of the building as well, or is it looking pretty run down? So that's one thing. And then again, depending on where you live, is the care community in a safe environment? Like, do you feel like you would only be able to go visit during the day because it's not in a safe environment? Or is this in a location that if there was a medical emergency and you needed to be there in the evening hours when it got dark, would you feel comfortable being there? So I know that sounds like it might be a weird kind of thing to add to your checklist, but I see a lot of different things with families, and sometimes that's the only option you have, because that's where they're going to have to stay is maybe in that type of environment where you can only visit during the day. Like I said, I came from the Milwaukee market. There were a lot of places that only Medicaid people, that's where they went, because that's what they did there, was just strictly Medicaid. So there's just a lot of things you need to know. Again, my name is Anna Lee Kruger with Care Right Incorporated. I help families across the country put aging plans in place. I facilitate family meetings so that everyone can be more on the same page and helping make informed decisions. Today's topic was a whole bunch of tips of what to do tours of care communities, whether it's assisted living, skilled nursing centers, memory care units. So I gave you, 15, 20 different tips on what to look for, what to ask about during the tours. Obviously, with Care Right, that's one of the service offerings that we provide to our families, to our clients, is helping them sort out different care community options based on what they can afford and what their care needs are now, but what we also can anticipate their care needs to be in the future. So if this sounded overwhelming to you, it should, because it is overwhelming if this isn't something that you do for a living. So just like families retain a financial planner or an estate attorney to help them put a financial plan or an estate plan in order, families retain me and Care Right to put an aging plan together so that everybody can have better outcomes instead of those daughters getting burned out or those sons getting burned out. A couple things to bring up quickly too is, yes, I'm still writing my book. It takes longer than what I anticipated. So I'm writing a book called The Invisible Patient, The Family Caregiver, The Emotional, Physical, and Financial Toll of Being a Caregiver. So it's kind of a how to avoid getting burned out workbook, or not necessarily a workbook, but a book to avoid getting caregiver burnout. The reason I called it that is because most of us that are my age are probably taking care of aging loved ones or will be taking care of aging loved ones. And I just want to encourage you, if you are a caregiver or anticipate being a caregiver, you have to schedule time for self-care, because caregiving can become very overwhelming very quickly. So the reason I called it The Invisible Patient is because everyone will ask, hey, how's your mom or how's your dad? Well, you know what? They're going to be doing well. And you know why? It's because you'll do everything in your power to make sure that they have the care that they need. And you'll make sure that your family, your kids and your husband or your wife have everything that they need, but it's going to come at the risk of you and your health. So I call it The Invisible Patient because everyone always asks, how's your mom or how's your dad? Nobody ever asks, how are you holding up? So that's what this book is about. So I'm doing pre-orders for the book. I have 2 chapters of this book to write. So once I get that done, it's going to be out on Amazon and available for sale. So I'm taking pre-orders of the book, The Invisible Patient, The Family Caregiver. So you can reach out on my website at www.carerightinc.com to do pre-orders of the book. I'm also doing pre-orders of advocacy kits. So if you want to learn how to be your own advocate when you find yourself in the hospital system or any kind of healthcare system, and you will need to have an advocate. So you either pay a professional to be your advocate, or you have to have your family do it, or you have to do it yourself. So I am taking pre-orders for advocacy kits, checklists on questions to ask, things that need to be followed up on, and common things that most families don't think about following up with the healthcare industry, with the nurses, questions to ask so that you feel confident in the care that you're going to be getting or the care that you're getting, and then what to do if you're not getting the care that you're needing. So pre-orders on The Invisible Patient and also pre-orders on the advocacy kits. Again, you can reach out to me through my website and let me know if you have interest in those. You can also schedule your 30-minute or 45-minute free consult with me through my website as well. There's calendar buttons on the Contact Us page, and you can schedule a meeting with me over Zoom or over the phone if you prefer. These podcasts the topics are all about aging and the caregiver crisis, and I have different professionals that come on as guests. So I'll have financial planners, attorneys, realtors, therapists. I have all sorts of different guests that come on. So last Tuesday or two Tuesdays ago, I had a physician on who talked about women's health and hormone health. Future podcast guests that I'll have are other doctors, nurses, therapists. So just check the website. We'll also be promoting these podcasts through social media as well. So if you have an interesting story and you would like to be a guest on the podcast as well, whether it's a caregiver story that you'd like to share, I open that up to my audience as well. If you'd like to be a guest, we can talk through that and see what your topic is, and we'll go from there. But I just wanted to say thank you again for everybody who is listening to the podcast or watching us on Facebook video or Facebook Live. Again, the topic today was mistakes families make because they don't know what they're doing when they're looking at these different care communities and different levels of care. So I appreciate your time today. Again, we have these podcasts the 1st and the 3rd and the 5th Tuesday of each month at 3 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much.